the apostles who died faithfully.
Perhaps you're familiar with what happens when you have a bad set of spark plugs in your car. You lose all ability to have combustion in the engine and all power in the process. And you have to replace that spark plug with whatever the manufacturer recommends. It has to be specific. In tonight's reading, we saw exactly how Judas, or how it came about that Judas needed to be replaced. But why was he replaced? And why were the 11 others who died faithfully, why weren't they replaced? Well, let's examine why Judas had to be replaced first, and we'll spend a little more time on why the 11 weren't. Firstly, Judas, as we know, he died unfaithful. He died a traitor, a defector. That's the first reason. See, he lost his spark. But more importantly, prophecy needed to be fulfilled. If we go to the Bible there in Acts chapter 1, verse 20, just to kind of set the stage here, Peter has just risen. He's within the congregation, and he's risen amongst the brothers. And this is, by the way, it's after the 40-day period in which Jesus came about and manifested to many. And it's just a few days after that, after he's ascended to heaven. And here Peter brings about this prophecy. In chapter 1, verse 20, it says, "For it is written in the book of Psalms, let his dwelling become desolate, and let there be no inhabitant in it. And his office of oversight let someone else take." And so what Peter's doing here is he's bringing to light this prophecy that partly had already been fulfilled. See, the first part there where it says, let his dwelling become desolate and let there be no inhabitant in it, had already been fulfilled. In fact, in the preceding verses of this passage, he talks about that. But it's that second part that we really need to zone in on. It says, his office of oversight let someone else take. It's pretty clear that Jehovah had this already written, and that this is what Jehovah desired to happen. There are never any coincidences with our God Jehovah. It had already been written, and it had to be done. But that still leaves the other question. Why were the other 11 apostles, why weren't they replaced when they died faithfully? Well, let's go to the following verses there. Acts chapter 1, verses 21 and 22. Here, Peter brings out what the qualifications are for a viable replacement for an apostle. He says, "It is therefore necessary that of the men who accompanied us during all the time in which the Lord Jesus carried on his activities among us," notice this, he says, "starting with his baptism by John until the day he was taken up from us. One of these men should become a witness with us of his resurrection." And we know that the apostles died faithfully, but he set the ground rules here. He says this person had to have been around during Jesus' baptism by John and until the day that he ascended on into heaven. And we know that there weren't very many that got to witness that, and that eventually it would be impossible to replace any of the apostles that did die. But further than that, and most importantly, it wasn't prophesied. So Jehovah did not intend for the other apostles to be replaced. So in summary, Judas had to be replaced because he died unfaithful. He lost his spark. Secondly, it was prophesied that he would be replaced. And we also talked about how the other 11 weren't replaced and why they weren't replaced. But why is that important to us? Why are we studying this tonight? Well, I came up with 3 really nice points for everyone to consider. It's encouraging to know that during these times, the apostles prayed and consulted the scriptures in order to make this decision, you see. And so it's a great question to ask ourselves. Are we doing that in our lives? Are we praying incessantly, as it says here in verse 14, where he says that they were persisting in prayer? Are we doing that when it comes to our decisions? Another point is pretty simple. Don't be like Judas. He was a perfect example of what we aren't supposed to be. He died unfaithful. We are definitely looking to die if we do die in this system of things. We are definitely looking forward to staying faithful, staying the course until the end. And thirdly, prophecy strengthens faith. Fulfilled prophecy, that is. The fact that we're able to read about prophecies being fulfilled before our very eyes on this page, the fact that they came true in Bible times, that those prophecies came true, gives us confidence in our day that the prophecies that are still to be fulfilled will in fact be fulfilled. Jehovah is a God of his word. And let's remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Let's read in conclusion Hebrews chapter 3, verse 14. This kind of brings to light exactly what we need to do in order to faithfully observe these prophecies that are still to be fulfilled. It says, "For we actually become partakers of the Christ only if we hold firmly down to the end the confidence we had at the beginning."